All right, there you go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. I am Zenshin. It's just my gamer tag. Maybe one day I'll put my real name. Probably not. This is my friend Angie, and this is I believe, our third show together,
Good.
where we just get together and we talk about things that are going on in the world. For anyone that doesn't know, we our friendship started out in a singles group, so it's kind of what we tend to discuss. Might branch out into more topics in the future. But today, I kind of wanted to dive into an article written by a psychologist by the name of Greg Matos. And I'm sure there's people that have heard of this article that I'm about to talk about. It's called What's Behind the Rise of Lonely Single Men. And in the article, he talks about some trends that men are facing right now in our modern society and modern dating that preclude men from having meaningful connections, specifically in relationships with women. And even though I believe he is correct insofar as men do struggle with in relationships due to lack of communication skills and skill deficits and things like that, I think he conflates some of these issues. And I'm gonna I actually wanted your opinion. I know that for the past two shows you kind of did a lot of the talking, but I definitely want a soundboard off of you. Um, Partially because yeah, you're a woman, so you're gonna have a different perspective. But I trust your opinion, so I kind of just wanted to hear what you have to think. You've read the article before. I'm not gonna go into all of that. I kind of just wanted to really hone in on the three trends that he noticed and where I think he got it wrong, but also where I think he got it right, but and also what you think. So I'm just gonna dive right into it.
All right. So
Um,
you want my opinion now, or you want me to
no,
like?
no, no. I haven't even listed the trends.
Okay.
So the three trends. I'm just gonna go right off the bat. Here are three broad trends in the relationship landscape that suggest heterosexual men are in for a rough road ahead. By the way, this article is on Psychology Today. So if you just go to Psychology Today and type in "What's Behind the Rise of Lonely Single Men," this article by Greg Matos will pop up. Okay.
Right.
So the number one is dating apps. So whether you're just starting to date or you're recently divorced and dating again, dating apps are a huge driver of new romantic connections in the United States. The only problem is that upwards of 62% of users are men, and many women are overwhelmed by the number of options they have. Competition in online dating is fierce, and lucky in-person chance encounters with dreamy partners are rarer than ever. So again, I'm going to soundboard off of you first. What do you think about that?
So dating apps, I've been on Bumble, Tinder, and OkCupid. Those are the ones that I'm consistently on.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a different culture with each three, right? The Tinder app is very much the conversation there is very much about hooking up, right? Let's just call it what it is. And then the conversation on Bumble, which the women have to initiate, is less about that, but it sometimes turns into that. And I think that the best conversations that I've ever had came from OkCupid, and that's because the community there is a little bit more open-minded, and they also have different categories. Okay, so in terms of competition and being overwhelmed by men, absolutely. I remember when I got onto OkCupid, there was like 3,000 likes in like 4 days. 4 days I had all these different likes and I'm like and like 200 intros. It felt like a job to go through all of that. And I was just like, I should hire someone to do this for me. Like, because I didn't want to do it myself when it became overwhelming. So that was my experience with it. I had too many matches. I didn't know like how to filter, at least not initially. Like over time, I got better with that. And it had automatic discriminators. One of the biggest discriminators that I could pick was height. Okay. And I know you and I have had offline discussion about this, and a lot of women vet for the top 10%. We're looking for a
Yeah.
six-figure guy. We're looking for a guy that's established, meaning that, he has his own place. He's not living at home. He's not living in the basement. He's kind of like he has his shit together, right? That's kind of the uh, filter that we use. The problem is that I may not be a person who attracts a man that has that because maybe he has different standards. Maybe he looks for women who might be um, prettier,
Mm-hmm.
less. less, I'm a heavyset woman. A lot of times that doesn't come across on camera, but I am.
No.
So, some discrimination against me might be um, my age, my femininity, and my physicality, like how healthy I look, right?
Mm.
So I think the dating apps perpetuate the stereotypes, and they also perpetuate the discrimination. They give you the opportunity to discriminate, like to
Mm.
limit, to filter. That's a discrimination thing. Like you're automatically excluding a lot of people that theoretically you might meet in real life and actually have a great connection with. So, when you and I talked about it, I was like, hey, I date short dudes. And you're like, you were kind of like laughing at it. And I was just like, I do, because like I feel like they have amazing personalities. And sometimes their personality they have to work on so much more because they know that they have a height differential that they have
Right.
to make up for. So when I talk to my single girlfriends and they're like, oh, I really like him, but he's short. Like I can see it in their mind that they're all. I'm like, I really like him, but he's short, and that's something that is consistent in the dating market, and some of those apps allow you to filter
Yeah.
for height. So as a woman, when I'm looking at that list, I have 3,000 matches. I have 200 intros. I'm talking about OkCupid because that's how it works. And I then look at what's the one thing that I can discriminate against? Height. So okay, the comparison is that we do this in real life, and more so in the past. I don't know how it works now. There was an SAT score, right? When you were in high school, when I was in high school, more than 20 years ago, I had to get a certain amount of SAT scores to get into certain schools. I don't know how it works now, but
Mhm.
people use some type of filter in order to make the list more narrow so
Right.
that they have a better chance of success. And the apps, that's a terrible, terrible place because you'll never know if you actually have a good connection with someone until you actually meet them in person. So
Right.
for me, the article was right. It is absolutely too many single, lonely men. And for a woman, we usually shut down when there's too many.
Right.
That's on the app side.
So from my end, it's a marketplace. And when you are overwhelmed with options, especially options that seem similar, like women get a million messages a day that are just like, hi, hey, hi, what's up, WID. You are naturally, especially if the messages are the same, even from the men that are very, very attractive, socioeconomically, physically, in terms of height, all those things, you're just naturally going to be like in your brain without even thinking about it, what's the best? So then you fall back into your unconscious discrimination patterns and you start filtering for height because they're all the same, right? All the men are giving you the same energy. So you have nothing else to go on. And this is a problem with men, but you have nothing else to go on but what I like. And if what you want is in that top percentile, that's what you're going to do. And it doesn't help the fact that I've seen plenty of men's profiles. I'm not gonna lie, we're bad at making profiles. Even some of the top tier dudes are bad at making profiles. So if all the men are bad at that, it just comes down to attraction. It just comes down to how tall is he? How educated is he? How much money does he make? Is he all the things that I want? If the majority of these men make bad profiles and have bad introductions, there's only that thing left. So I do think men can step up their game there. But absolutely, if you're overwhelmed, if you don't give up entirely, you're just going to filter for the best. And again, the data proves this out. Women swipe right about 14% of the time. So it's not even the top 20% of men. It's less than the top 15% of men, which is staggering. And I also think I think dating apps are like a hyper distilled um, marketplace that taps into our most primal instincts in a lot of ways, and our most primal desires. And there's no illusions because you're behind a screen, so no one's there to judge you. So you can be as discriminatory as you want. You can engage with those filters as much as you want. I remember I read an article where I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, Bumble had a height filter, and over 80% of women filtered for men 6 feet and above. So that means
It
over
still has
80%.
it. It still
It
has
still
it.
has it. I guess they brought it back. So that means over 80% of women simply are not seeing the men below 6 feet. Literally they're not seeing them. But those same women will say there's not any good men. So they're conflating the term good man with man that I find desirable or man that I find attractive for whatever reason. They're not the same. They're not interchangeable. It's both of those things. And like you said, it's like a job application where you're looking at their resume but you won't really know how good of a worker someone is until they're hired, and do they gel with the culture and the principles of the business and the job and things of that nature. It's the same thing here. You can look at a guy's resume and find him attractive. Doesn't mean you're compatible. You're only looking at the chemistry, the things that you like, the things that spark your interest. That doesn't mean you're aligned. And what I found so fascinating is I've met so many women in person. Again, we met in a dating group. Um, I've met women on that site that said, yeah, in person, I've met great men who I never would have swiped right on. So it's almost like these few of those women were telling on themselves. They were admitting, yeah, I am more discriminatory online. And again, a lot of that comes back to being overwhelmed and the fact that there's no one there over your shoulder, kind of checking you and bringing you back to reality and saying, okay, this guy's like 6'5" and he makes $500,000 a year and he has multiple master's degrees. You work at Walmart, he probably doesn't want to date you. I'm sorry. Like, and that's not to be mean, but it's realistic. Like in terms of social economics, in terms of your social circle, how would you even meet this guy? But we don't think like that. You see, I think social media has subverted reality in many ways. And we think that because we see it, it is attainable. And that's not necessarily true.
All
This,
right, so let's talk about a couple of things that you just said, because you actually said a couple of like things that the article didn't go into. One of them is that when you meet in the wild, everybody says the wild, you're somewhat meeting people that are probably there's some commonality. Like either you're geographically in the same area, and a lot of times I do real estate, so I know that people in the same area might have the same income. So like if I'm hanging out, I'm in Jersey, New Brunswick, Hoboken, Morristown, the likelihood is that I meet someone who has an income similar to me because those are areas that have higher income levels, right? But if I hang out in other places where the average income is a little bit lower, then maybe I meet people that are not necessarily on the same income level. We're only talking about income. Income is a discriminator, not in the dating apps though. I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you. I don't think that that's it's not something that we can filter for. I don't know if occupation is something that you can filter for, but that's something that people will say is a deal breaker in some cases. Obviously, like if you get,
I've had women ask me, how much do you make a year?
yeah.
And the reactions I got from when I was an assistant manager at a restaurant were much more positive than when I first started at that restaurant and I was just a cashier. And the reasoning is obvious.
So you said that part. That part is like when you're in a normal social environment, you might meet people who already have common interests, and so we don't discriminate against those things. We just allow the connection to take place naturally. Okay. The second part that you said, and I think that this is important, especially in the dating world, is that men do not write a decent profile.
Mm-hmm.
I know this because when I'm swiping, there's really nothing for me to judge him on based on him wearing a hat, sunglasses, and he might look like a human being. I don't know because like sometimes they look very hidden, or it's just their face, or it's and it becomes a thing where it's like, how much effort did he really put into this dating thing? He didn't put any effort. I've also had men who kind of copied other people's profiles and they had like lyrics or they had very poor articulated like who they were. They were like, "Oh, I'm terrible at this." You're terrible
Mm-hmm.
at knowing who you are. Like that's what you're saying to me. So when you said that part, it resonated with me 100%. And women read. So we read the profile. And if you have nothing, there's nothing for us to base you on. So we just discriminate based on your looks, your whatever else that you put that you actually did fill out. The other part is I don't think a lot of men are honest about their actual situation. Let me explain.
Mm-hmm.
I've matched with one guy and he had 7 kids. 7.
You don't need to be dating, but okay. All right.
Okay. I was like, okay, explain to me how we get to 7, right? He's like, oh, I got several mothers, I've had, 2 here, 3 here, 2. I was like, sir, you
Sir.
dating, right? And then, the interesting thing with me is whenever I meet someone, I'm always interested in their story. I'm like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, which one of these women were you actually in love with? He said, none of them. I was like, okay, so your relationships are never based on love. It's always based on attraction, physical attraction. So I just couldn't, if I looked at him, I make it pregnant. I was like, fuck, I'm not dating.
That's his mutant ability,
So they're not really honest about their situation, and then I have to find that out through conversation. And and I think that it's a legitimate concern. If you're on your second or third relationship, you might have multiple kids with multiple women, but it's a thing that it bothers us a little bit because like it shows us that you're too cavalier, with
Mm.
your sexuality, that you're willing to give it to anyone, and that you're going to produce children with these people, and then whether or not you're actually taking care of them is a different story. But like, I remember that guy who had the 7, and I thought it was a typo. I was like, you mean 2, right? No, you don't have 7. He's like, no,
Mm.
I have 7 kids. I was like, you can't, for me personally, in the geographical area, you can't actively be involved with 7 and love them adequate, right? Especially if you're maintaining a relationship, a job, and all these other things. I feel like that, unless you have help, unless you're rich, unless you're Nick Cannon. Nick is like up to like 11, I think.
Mm.
How can you adequately give your love and attention to that many children, unless you're in a family unit? And he wasn't in any of these. And then when he told me he didn't love any other women, I was like, all right, cool, thanks, peace. Like, I learned a little bit about him. I was like, thank you for sharing that. So men are just, they're not honest even in the conversations that we're having with them. And a lot
Mm.
of times they might actually still be in relationships, and
Mm.
they're just kind of testing the waters. They're like, oh, if I find a girl that, motivates me, I'll then it's like they'll cancel their subscription with the other chick, right? And then they'll start something new with you if they like you. And I'm like, that's not how it works, and you're already being dishonest with me. And if you're being
Right.
dishonest with me, you've already broken trust. A lot of times women take that as a personal slight, and then they shut down. They don't want to date you anymore. So in these conversations, you hit on it, which is that they're the, hey, how are you, what are you doing? But when we actually have conversation with you, you're not being honest with us. and
Yeah.
and that's a real big problem, and it's okay. I did went on a date with someone. I'll share the story now. We'll let you reflect on some of that. I went on a date with someone who said that he had a drug problem in the past. He was already on month number 9. I met him in person, and he was in recovery. Super honest. He's like, I'm in recovery. I'm here because I need to socialize. Cool. And then he's like, I have 2 kids. I'm not really engaged in their lives. That's where I really should focus on. Cool. Like, I actually wanted to date him because he was honest. I was like, wow, even though those are things that are hard, because he's similar to a guy who has 7 kids. He was not in their lives. He was in recovery. He really shouldn't be dating, because the first year they tell you never to date when you're in recovery. But I had a great connection with him. He was honest. And when he
Mm.
was honest, it actually spurred my interest. But given his situation, he also decided, hey, I gotta take a back seat. He's like, he realized in our conversation that he should really focus on his kids and getting out of, his drug addiction cycle. So that was an unusual feeling for me, especially since I was like, wow, like, it's possible that I could have so much empathy for someone who's simply honest, and that's actually intriguing. That means that I was exposed to so many bad experiences, that honesty was actually going to win me over to a second date.
Right. I told you that's been my experience as well. I'll say this, like, I'm a short guy. And it's so funny because I think me just telling women the truth has led to infinitely more success than any amount of dating psychology that I learned, any amount of methodology, any amount of, I'm going to filter for this, I'm going to plant a seed here. Any of those things still paled in comparison to the effect of just being honest. And again, we talk about dating market forces. One of those market forces is the actions of other people. The actions of everyone else is going to affect the value of certain behaviors and thought patterns. So because a lot of men aren't honest, the fact that I tell the truth now has value. Truth is now a currency. And we can have a different conversation about that. This is a fascinating conversation in so many ways. This is most likely going to be a part 2 to this video, but that's cool. It's fine.
What's the second trend? You said there would be a second trend.
The second, well, we're like halfway through our time, and there's still 2 more subjects to cover
All right,
within
go
this
ahead.
article.
Hit me with the next one.
So the next one is relationship standards. With so many options, it's not surprising that women are increasingly selective. I do a live TikTok show at Better Love Project and speak with hundreds of audience members every week. I hear recurring dating themes from women between the ages of 25 and 45. They prefer men who are emotionally available, who are good communicators, and who share their values. This kind of ties into number 1, but again, if women are hyper selective for the top percent of men, there's not even a guarantee that those men will share your values. So I think that's a direct correlation. Again, if you're only choosing men from that small pool, you got to consider how many of those men in that pool even share your values. You like what they look like, and you like what they represent. You like the concept of that thing. And this is going into like psychology, but remember, for a long time, women didn't have options. It was really up to the husband to enrich a woman's life, to bring her happiness, because you were regulated to the home. So it was that man, happy wife, happy life. And a man was to take pride in the fact that he could bring joy to his wife. So I think women are still, remember, this whole financial independence thing, it's not even 100 years old. Women couldn't have a credit card until the 1970s in their name. So this is all still very new.
Right.
So this idea that a man is that one in your life I think it's still prevalent. So I think that kind of interferes with things as well. So I think that's part of the reason why women do tend to want that top level guy, because they're conflating that attraction with he's going to be the one to bring more value to my life in multiple aspects. And it's not necessarily true. Compatibility has to be there. Do you align in your lives? But I think that's also a slippery slope, because relationships skills, they're muscles. You have to be able to exercise them and flex them. So if a quote unquote average man who doesn't get many dating opportunities, he doesn't get many opportunities to work on those relationship skills, well, he's going to go through muscle atrophy, right? Because he's not getting into relationships. So when he finally gets lucky enough for a woman to give him a chance, he doesn't know what he's doing, and the relationship fails.
All right, I want to talk about this because I think this is a good segue. So I think the issue is really men do not have female friendships. Platonic.
I would agree with that.
They need it. They absolutely need a social system to plug into. Like when you're in high school and college, you automatically have you have a dating pool, right? It's whoever's in your community. But when you get into the workplace and you're encouraged not to date anyone at work, you might be doing remote work. Now you're isolated. Where's your social network? So historically, and I go to a lot of museums, Marcel, and I want to tie this into something that I've done recently. I've been to Officers Row here in New Jersey. It's in the back of Sandy Hook. I've been to Newport, Rhode Island, and they have mansions. And both locations had rooms where women had an office, and their primary job was to socialize. Okay, so the man worked, the woman created the social calendar. So in a relationship, a man has a social calendar. So like I hear this often when a man and a woman are together, and they break up, who gets the friends, right? When they separate, who's gonna in the divorce? Let's say they're we're joking, but who gets friends? A lot of times the men lose all those friendships because they were based on the woman still pushing the social calendar. So it's still something that women do. Okay. Now, as a dating technique, women require or usually want men to take them out, plan dates. We're now putting the social calendar back on them, which is unusual because historically, we're the ones who organize the social calendar. So like if you go to these two places, Officers Row, there's a house that you can actually tour. And then if you go to Newport, Rhode Island, to the mansions, you see where these women operated. And their only job was to create a social environment. And they met with other women, they had friendships, and you were supposed to socialize with people in your own social status. And I'm like, okay, we're still doing that because the men are not inviting us, asking and planning dates. And the reason I think might be is that they're burnt out. And they're burnt out because they don't have platonic friendships already. They don't have a social DNA or a social personality. Like they need to have places that they like, things that they like to do, things that they can take her to go do with him, so they need this like schema, like a blueprint, and then they have to present that to the woman, and they have to be okay with being rejected. And I think men struggle with being alone. And what I see them doing in the dating market is they go from one relationship to the next. So they're numbing themselves. They're never actually working on themselves. Like when a man and a woman break up, you might notice that the woman takes a break. She doesn't get into a relationship right away. She leans on her fellow female friends, and she's like, all right, I'm kind of hurt. She processes that hurt, versus men will be like, all right, I'm sleeping with the next one because that's what's going to help me get over it. And I remember reading men's magazines in the past, and that was one of the things that they recommended which is that if you want to get over someone, get underneath someone. Used to be like the saying. And
Mm.
that's something that men do. Like as soon as they break up with someone, they want to go clear their head, so they sleep with someone very quickly.
If
Women,
they're capable of it, because I would argue that the average man definitely is going to have a hard time easily
but he's gonna
getting
work on
another
that.
woman.
He's gonna work
Yeah.
on that. And he's gonna try to get into another relationship
Mm.
fast. Versus being single, like I think the idea of a man being single for a year, purposefully, intentionally, is unheard of. If they're
Mm.
single, it's because they're having a hard time in the dating market. But I don't think they actually do it on purpose. Versus women do. We do sometimes
Mm.
take a break and we're just focused on ourselves. We lean on our fellow female friends and we go live life and we're happy versus you guys are not happy being single. I think there's something to be said that women are more happier when they're single versus men
Mm.
because marriage is an institution that benefits men. It doesn't really benefit women at this stage.
Mm.
And
Well, that
I've read some of that online.
right. So there's another article I read pertaining to that. For one thing, women push marriage way more than men. And if men suggest that, in my experience, when I've suggested that, marriage doesn't really benefit you, why do you want it? I get lambasted. Women are like, you're just a bum and you don't want to step up. So a lot of that is just conditioning. Like I'm just talking about data and women will insult me. So a lot of that is conditioning. Women are conditioned to think marriage is like this final jewel in your crown, and it's not necessarily going to benefit you at all. I don't want marriage for, again, very grounded reasons. I don't want children. I have no desire to leave a legacy of any kind, nor do I want to be pair bonded to any one human under the law. So marriage is not for me. I also read that the top percentile of marriages where the man actually is mentally and emotionally grounded, both sides reap the benefits. Men do still tend to die sooner. I think that's just always going to be the case. We tend to engage in riskier behaviors, but in both those cases, stress levels go down, happiness levels go up. I'm sure you've read. Again, we're in dating groups. I'm sure you've read the many testimonies of the women in the group. Their husband passed, but while he was alive, it was my greatest time. He was the love of my life. We never fought. So those marriages definitely exist. But and I think that relates back to what this article is talking about, the deficits and the lack of emotional availability, the lack of connectivity. Because again, relationship skills are muscles. So if a man doesn't have those opportunities to get into relationships and fail, and he doesn't have those building blocks in place, as you said, you don't really have emotionally grounded friendships, especially with women. That's where those relationship skills building blocks come from, because being able to communicate effectively and being vulnerable, those are two components of friendships as well, or at least deep and meaningful friendships. There are different types of friendships. There are friendships, men tend to base their friendships on a shared activity. So one of my best friends, who I'm the godfather of his two children, and that's the advantage of being a godfather. I can give kids back. So I don't need to have kids. But we got into competitive gaming together. And then after a few months, we started connecting. He started opening up about his girlfriend. We were going through similar situations with both of our girlfriends. He cried about a situation and I felt empathy for him and I cried too. That took a good 6-7 months. And we were in a vulnerable place. We were usually alone because we would drive to New York. We would drive to different states to compete together. So that was the basis of our bond, and we explored more of that emotional connectivity as time went on. I think women are a bit quicker to jump into that, emotional networking, which can be devastating if a friendship doesn't work out early on, but it seems to reap benefits and dividends in the long run for women. So I definitely think, each gender has something to learn from the other. That's something men need to learn from women. Like,
All
be
right.
willing to open up and be connected to your friends.
Women compete with each other though, and they're mean to each other. So like
That
I
is something that men generally, we're not really that mean to each other. It's playful, but I do agree with you there.
when women are
Women do
very
tend
mean
to
to each
be,
other. And let
yeah.
me explain. Like I feel like you said competition. Like usually men base some of their friendships based on competitiveness, right? Women
Mm.
are doing the same thing and they're competing in stories. Like they're like,
Mm.
oh, he took me here. Oh, I did this. And it's a very subtle competition. And I see
Mm.
it taking place among my friends. Like if I have a group of friends that are single, we talk and we're like, so how's your weekend? And she's like, oh, I went on this amazing date. And then the other girl starts sharing about the date, even though she never really wanted to talk about it. It's because she wants to feel that she's as significant or valuable as the other girl who just talked about a date and now she's talking about a date. That's why women obsess about how did he propose to you?
Mhm.
Why? Why does that matter in our
Why does that
society?
matter?
Right. And it matters because it's a story that we can share over and over again, and it's a competitive story. The more romantic your story is, the more valuable you are, apparently.
Yeah, and the more you're mean, and again, and that puts a lot of pressure on the man. So if a man doesn't propose exactly the way you want, now you've jumped to the conclusion that he doesn't love me that much or he doesn't understand me. And there might be some truth in that, but the foundation of that original thought isn't wholesome. The foundation of that thought is, I want to compete with other women or I want to impress other women. And it's like other women aren't going to be in your marriage. Other, they some will be. They'll, when you maybe have a fight with your husband and you need to blow off steam and you call one of your girls, some of them might be, but not the world. And that's another thing as well. I think marriages have become performative. But that's a totally different conversation, a good conversation. But we're running down on time, so I want to get to this last one, and then maybe we'll do a part two where we talk more about like what that means holistically for the dating market. But the last one is skill deficits. For men, this means a relationship skill gap that, if not addressed, will likely lead to fewer dating opportunities and longer periods of being single. There's less patience for poor communication skills today. The problem for men is that emotional connection is the lifeblood of healthy long-term love, and it requires all the skills that families still are not consistently teaching young boys. Right. So I touched on that before. I've touched on that on my own, personal dating insights, where the world is changing pretty quickly especially in Western civilization, Western society. And, other articles talk about this, about young men being left behind. And I think this is one of those ways where we're not, before it was kind of enough that, okay, fine, a guy might not be the most emotionally available, but if he's the breadwinner, it was kind of enough, which is a detriment in some ways. But now those gaps are closing. In many ways, we're returning to where we once were, where women, I theorize that maybe we'll get to what we once were, where women are doing a lot of the breadwinning. It used to be that men would go out and hunt, but in ancient times, the women would forage and bring home, the fruits and the vegetables and things like that. It was the women that kept the villages fed for the most part. Men hunted, and that was like prize game. That was a way to prove that you were valorous and you were a warrior and you were courageous. But it was the women that did a lot of that stuff and kept us alive. I think we might return to that, where a man's income might just be a trophy, but it's the women that really are providers. It's interesting to think about, but yeah, standards are going up. So that means women have less tolerance. I used to, men always say women have high standards, and women say, no, the bar is in hell. It's both. Women chase the top 10%. That's the high standard, high potential dating standard, high standard of attraction, but a low standard for relationships.
All right, let's talk
It's
about
both.
this. In our society, I think the trend that's actually taking place is that the hero instinct for a man isn't as valuable as it
Necessary.
was
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
past. And you can see
Right.
this in Hollywood. Like there are a lot of movies in the past 30 years that have strong female characters. Look at the
Mm.
Avengers and like how many female characters. And every time there's a film and it's a woman, it's a woman who's strong, you're a little bit more attracted to that story, at
Mm.
least for me, right? Because I never resonated with the damsel in distress story.
Mm.
Now, I do want to tie this into like how we're raised. I think I have two brothers, one sister. My sister and I are comparatively more successful than my brothers. And I'm always curious as to why in the same household, my brothers struggled much harder than my sister and I. And that's because my parents, especially my mother, she made
He
sure that
pushed
we
you
were
guys.
independent
He pushed you guys.
because she couldn't be. My
Mm.
mom was a housewife, and
Right.
she was trapped in the institution of marriage. She didn't get to do what she wanted to do, which was be a stewardess. That was her dream, like to travel the world. So with regards to like how people were raised in the past, I'm curious to see what this new generation does. Like I feel a little bit of a distance between like myself and like someone who's in their 20s and 30s, obviously, because they're raised a little bit differently, like where there's more of an equality, and that
Mm.
men don't have to have the upper echelon income, but they have to have something else, which is the emotional intelligence to keep that relationship going. Like to
Mm.
be a man that's wanted versus needed.
Right. I will touch on that. I don't think most men are wanted, whether it's attraction, relationship wise, or both. There's an article I want to talk about, actually, about a trans man, and he talks about his experiences from going from a woman where she felt like she was always wanted and always chased. She became a man, and now it's like himself prove that they're valuable, even in the first couple dates, having to prove that they're worth the woman's time. And I think that was fascinating. So we might talk about that one day. But yeah, so that's the last 3 points that I agree with. And it goes back to what I said before, where if a man is not experienced, it creates it's like a steamroll effect where you get left behind by the men who do have opportunities. So again, we go back to these top 10% guys. They might have skill deficits as well, but because women want them, they're going to get more opportunities to hash that out. They're going to get more opportunities to say, I failed here. I love this woman and she dumped me. What can I learn? And eventually they're going to get it right. But if you're a regular guy or a short guy or a guy maybe that's not as educated or as attractive, you have less opportunities. So you might get into one relationship every few years, and you have to do more work within that relationship if it fails, and still that there's that element of luck you're dealing with, still find someone new, and stay on top of those lessons that you learned. It's more difficult, and you're more likely to stumble or lose those skills between in the interim. So it becomes even more important to work on those skills with the connections that you do have, your friends and your family. And I think it is a very real reality that if you're going to struggle more, and it's a much more real reality that if you're an average guy, you might not end up with a partner. And I think we like to believe that there's someone for everyone, and that's not necessarily true. Even if there was, what's the chances that you meet them? I mean, there's a lot of men that are good men that they do die alone. And I think that's something that men accept.
There's someone for everyone is a story I think that we perpetuate in order to sell diamonds, in order to like
It's comfort food.
right. Or it's a thing where we have to like always sell the story that marriage is something to accomplish. And you and I take a different position on that. We're actually pretty similar on that, which is that I can be in a long-term relationship and not be married and happy. And I'm actually happy about that. Like I feel like that's an area that I can't compromise on. Like I don't need marriage, but I need a long-term relationship just because I know that that's what I want. So, I feel parents today have a huge task
Mm.
because the gender roles are very skewed, right? We have non-binary people, we have trans, we have all these, there's no formula anymore. Now it's like everybody's equal. We're neutral. Everybody's neutral, right?
What I find interesting is that I think women really like some aspects of that formula, and they kind of want men to go with the flow, and men are just confused. Like they like the aspect of the formula where it's like, yeah, ask me out and try to impress me, but in other aspects, no, be completely different. And men just kind of want it. Men do well when we have a clear blueprint, and women themselves don't quite know what the blueprint is, so they're confused too, and so they can't really tell men what they want. So
Here's
men
the
are kind of like
quickest
out in the rain.
blueprint every man should have. Ask her out on 3 dates, have 3 different places that you like, that you want to take her, so that you want to get to know her. That's She's gonna know whether or not she likes you after the third date. She'll make an investment in you, and she'll say, "Okay, I like this guy. I'm gonna actually date him." 3 dates is usually how much it takes, and some women know that much sooner, but they'll give you the chance to like take them out, and actually like entertain them, show them that you're emotionally intelligent, that you're not just there to like hook up. And if you do that, you might get more of an opportunity, and you can stretch that relationship and see whether or not you're interested in. But when you're playing the field and you have so many different options, and you're just doing, hey, whatever, how are you? Seeing where, your energy could be fulfilled that night, you're not really investing. And when you're not investing, you're not going to get really good results. We're actually going to run out of time. So,
Yeah, so that's why I was pointing. Yeah, so it's definitely gonna be a part 2 follow up. Thank you for joining us. This is a conversation that could go on for eternity. But yeah, definitely gonna be a part 2 because he mentioned some other things, way to bridge those gaps. But thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
all right, cool.